Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to Tanzania. The story, of course, banning the chicken or the chicks from Kenya, about 5,000 of them, and previously we saw 6,400 of them being banned by Tanzania. And the government has come out to starkly deny that this is not truly pegged on a trade dispute between us and Tanzania. What is happening, especially when it comes to the diplomatic row that we are seeing between Kenya and Tanzania, not only with the chicks, also some of our citizens in Tanzania have been affected adversely by Tanzanians authority, looking also at the herd of cattle that I think were also confiscated by Tanzania as well. It seems there is a blood that is actually coming up between us and Tanzania.
Debarl, if you talk about trade and look at Kenya, favorable trade balance.
Yes.
The closest and the largest trade partners we have are the East African, Uganda and Tanzania, being very critical. I have two friends who are permanent secretaries in Tanzania, whom I've spent a lot of time with. One of them, of course, was in Mombasa, discussing about this very topic. The question is not bad blood. We need to have a thorough understanding. What can Kenya sell to Tanzania, and what can Kenya buy from Tanzania?
Yes.
We need to have a clear articulation in East Africa, and therefore, when you sell chicks, the question is, can Tanzania produce chicks? And if that is a forbidden item, then why are you crossing the border with the chicks? So it might be as simple as that, or misunderstanding, and let's not go deeper into bad blood between the two countries.
You don't think so? There is a sort of a tension simmering between us and Tanzania.
Yeah,
trade is governed by rules. There are two frameworks that govern trade between, say, Kenya and the neighbors. One is the WTO rules. The second one is the East African Community Protocol on Trade. And in all this, there is a provision for trade dispute mechanisms when there is a dispute on trade. When you look at the issue of the chicken, one can imagine that perhaps one of the areas could be violated in terms of trade is if the sanitary and the phytosanitary rules are not observed meticulously, because when we import such products, they could carry with them disease. And therefore, as an exporter, you are required to undertake certain protocols, inspect them, and have a certificate of inspection. And if the importer looks at those protocols and find they are in line, they cannot then proceed to carry out certain actions like what we see now. It could then be that there is something not right that has been done, because under the East African Community, unless it is a protected item and therefore country notified that this kind of product shall not be imported, then, and somebody has gone ahead and violated it, then of course there is something here that needs to be talked about. And so, like Professor Midamba said, it is important to get at the root of the matter. But I mean, it's also a matter of public record that our trade, as he said, is robust. This is a region that has got a lot of potential. If you look at trade flows between Tanzania and Kenya, is very good and has a lot of promises. And therefore, we need to nurture it. And we shouldn't allow events to cloud out all these issues. Perhaps we should prosecute it carefully to find out what could have gone wrong. And if then we find it is the exporter who was wrong, then let's take remedial measures from our side to make sure that doesn't happen. If it is Tanzania, there are mechanisms that we need to follow up to make sure such a thing doesn't happen.
Yeah, let's hear from Dr. Khanende.
Yeah, it's been interesting because in the last couple of years, even though Tanzania has a history of being a reluctant member of this marriage called the East African Community, and they tend always to be suspicious sometimes of our motives and sometimes our ability to actually ignore the concerns of others around us, which is not very helpful. Now, we've discussed on this panel before some of the things that have happened, between Kenya and Tanzania. Mm-hmm. And, for me, I would say, when adults in the village are not talking and are not discussing, people tend to do silly and childish things. Because while Tanzania is entitled to prevent the spread of bird flu in this country, there are other ways of actually establishing that, because you can test those chicks. You don't have to kill them. Mm-hmm. However, the fact that that is what is being resorted to, it shows you some breakdown. There's something which is not being discussed. And I think these countries need to sit together seriously, and the leaders need to engage each other a lot more often. And in part because that's just one issue that we actually have with Tanzania. Right now, we are not at a place where we should be diplomatic with Tanzania, neither do we have the type of influence that we had over these countries and over our neighbors in recent years. And so that is something we should actually think so seriously as a country, and perhaps about time we started talking and stopped complaining.
Mm-hmm. All right, yes.
Debarl, thank you. I think what is important is to understand that states don't interact and don't think with their hearts like people. I know matters of procedure or circumstantial issues sometimes create a little bit of diplomatic bottlenecks here and there. But diplomats don't speak the kind of language we are talking sometimes. They burnt our cheeks and such things. There's a way that states interact. Ambassador has elucidated a number of things that are fundamental about how far we've taken our common market protocol arrangement. And in fact, the EAC has a broader vision than even the EU, because they wanted to go beyond a common currency into a federation. The EU just want to mostly go up to the common currency. That is at least the framework. So, the idea is that we have a great vision that our founding fathers and former leaders of our common countries have wanted. There could be a bit of idiosyncratic variables that could be at play, squabbles here and there, mm-hmm. But that does not mean that the house is on fire, and that is not the way to look at it. Tanzania is the second biggest trading partner with Kenya here after Uganda. Mm-hmm. And we are in good talking terms. So, in fact, these were Tanzanian citizens who are importing these chicks and so on. They may want to talk more on matters of procedure, like, test the chicks and how to dispose. Because one thing is to, like when you say ban them, it's just about to sanitize and not let them go through, but they probably do want to take chances. But these are things that can be done in a way that they don't raise eyebrows or raise unnecessary controversy. But I think our diplomatic relations are on the brighter side for the most part. And you cannot wish away your neighbor. We need your neighbors, they can't move. And we have a lot of historical, cultural relations, and that's why we are in an East African community and so on. And that's the way to go.
All right.
There are no two ways about it. We have to manage it.
But with the fact that we had around 6,500 or 6,400 also cattle being auctioned in Tanzania, and the stock excuse that they could be infected, I mean, it really flies in the face of what now they're telling us. Also, this bird flu, maybe the chicks are infected with bird flu, because then if they are, if the cattle are infected as well, why auction them? Why not ban them, right? That will be the question. But let's say from Professor Naomi Damba.
Debarl, the PS for Trade who was in Uganda, who was in Mombasa the other day, is a very good friend of mine. He's coming to my village. We make nyama choma. We are very relaxed. We are, understandable. He's a professor of distinction who knows Kenya in and out. The point is we must respect the protocol. We spend a lot of energy and time with the EU people, with China, with the US. Mm-hmm. And those trade balance between Kenya And China is like up and down. America up and down, European up and down.
Yes.
The only favorable trade balance we have is within the East Africa, like my friend Kisao just said. Now, so if this is the favorable trade balance, is it not incumbent on us to spend as much energy as we are spending with China, such that we understand the psyche of Tanzania people, their ways and areas where we can compromise very easily? We are not doing that. We are underestimating the ability of our neighbor and what they need to do. And, you know, then we're flying in and say they ban our chicken. You know, tomorrow they sold our cows. The point is, what exactly is going on the border between these two countries? Are people following protocol? That is the underlying thing that the Kenyan team need to understand.
Okay, and of course we have also here tucked away that according to the BBC, Magufuli, who was speaking in Kagera, this is way back in last year, region said Tanzania is not a veterinarian field for livestock, and he will take livestock in strict control of any domestic animal, right? This is just in light of what we're just talking about. Maybe to wrap it up, we can hear from Khanenje finally on this. So there's no diplomatic tension or diplomatic trade tension arising between Kenya and Tanzania.
I think
that is what we can conclude.
Yeah, I think there's no substantial tension, you know, so to speak. I just think we've not really been doing a very good job in trying to make sure that we stick by our agreements, but we also follow through with a lot of things. And as Professor just mentioned, and I had mentioned it earlier, we've had a tendency, you know, Tanzania and Uganda, they are our two largest trading partners, and sometimes we have a tendency of actually ignoring some of their needs and wishes, especially in the against the background that even within the ESC, you know, Kenya is the one that enjoys the advantage for the most part up until today. And so I think we should also be sensitive to that and be able to deal with our neighbors with respect.
All right.
Just one word on that. In trying to understand this story better, it is important for us to look at what are the trade flows like. Are we just trading in these two products? The answer obviously is no. Has there been any trade dispute in other products? Are we still exporting without any issues some of those products? What could be the underlying causes then, particularly for these two, particularly related to agricultural products?
Yes.
Globally, and this is all over the world, agriculture sector is very heavily protected because of the potential, you know, dangers that it poses, whether disease, but also it's a security sector, because feeding people means you must, many countries, I mean, look at Japan, very small country, doesn't have land, but protects agriculture very heavily to make sure that whatever they have can be able to go a long way. And so I think it's important for us to look at this to see that we develop harmonious relationship with the neighbors, to encourage trade flow, to show, as somebody mentioned earlier on, that this trade is not one way. In fact, when you look at the statistics, I've been privileged to have been part of the trade arrangement under COMESA, in the South Africa community and all that. And I know that when people look at this, they conclude very quickly that, oh, Kenya is a more industrialized country and therefore but if you look at what we're importing from Tanzania, it's quite substantial. And this is dynamic. I mean, Tanzania natural gas, yes. We could be importing from there. We're importing electricity from Ethiopia and all this. And what countries needs to start understanding, when you come to the table, you may have a deficit with A, but you have a surplus with E. But at the end of the day, you are a win-win situation. And that's what we should encourage. All it requires is to remove the fear, but also develop understanding.
Right. So we have the new cabinet secretary, that is Monica Juma, Ambassador Monica Juma, who has her work cut out so far on how she can try and streamline and try to, you know, iron out the kinks, of course, that we have right now with Tanzania as far as this is concerned. Thank you very much. Let's now drill deep and try to see what we have in South Africa. And if my director, Mark, may just pick up this particular editorial cartoon that we have today in the Daily Nation, This is how ANC is trying to pull down the statue of Zuma, who is also saying, no, I'll not resign. Oh, we need to give me more time. 6 months down the line is when now I should actually tender my resignation. But it's high time, according to the South Africa, that his tenure has been checkered with so much corruption, so much unethical leadership. So many, if you look at some of the parliamentary proceedings that we do have, especially the State of the Union address or a State of a Nation address, you see the opposition really castigating Zuma on all manner of ills, from rape cases and the HIV/AIDS, claims that he can heal through I don't know what sort of showering, and I mean some outrageous things that we can say has happened during his tenure as well. But now ANC recalling Zuma. This is the second president who has been recalled by the party because of non-performance. What does it tell? And I think this is the same question that we were posing to some of the panelists that we had yesterday here. What does it portend as far as democracy is concerned? Right? Are we looking at South Africa as a bastion of democracy? That we have political parties which are so strong that if one is not really performing, then you're actually recalled, as it is then for Zuma?
Debarl, this is a tragic event of an unproportional situation and has a far-reaching implication for the continent of Africa. In 1979, Henry Kissinger did a study of South Africa. And the issue at that time was what clear role that the US need to play. Should they support the apartheid regime and continue to sustain the suppression of millions of black people? Or should they moderate the apartheid situation and be sensitive to the need of the masses of local people? And one thing that came clear is that the men on the street, the men and women on the street was very angry. And they were not quite clear the role that Mandela will play to moderate the anger that has been created and the vacuum that has been created for years and years. And so US chose to moderate the apartheid regime without openly opposing them out. And consequently, we had a resolution where Mandela was released and Mandela became the president. And then we begin the role of nation building, which was seen as very peaceful. Several years later, we have this crisis. And in my trip to South Africa, the men and women on the street are still very angry. Their life has not changed. There are many by millions, and they blame the African regime as well as the white regime that still continue to benefit. The consequence is very serious here, Debarl. Zuma still have incredible support in this KwaZulu province and the people of Natal. He has manipulated this situation right from the beginning, as we can remember, is the one who was instrumental in pushing out Thabo Mbeki out of the situation. Here's the thing about the relationship between Zuma and ANC is very crucial on how they handle it. If they seem to push him out, he's going to back down and he's going to anchor down. And really, three things that's going to happen. Parliament will have to pass a vote of no confidence, which will lead to anywhere. Secondly, impeach him. And that is a long process, and you cannot guarantee what will happen. And then, lastly, Zuma may try to stay put and then create a serious national crisis of unproportion, which will unearth all the historical issues, and then we can see calamity of South Africa. South African leadership was expected to take on the leadership of Africa, just like the US from the Second World War leadership of what we call the free world.
Yes.
Europe have their own leadership. Asians have their own leadership. Except if Zuma become like Kabila or South Sudan, then who do we look for in Africa as a leader? So we have a very serious implication here.
All right, let's hear from Erastus.
I agree to most part what the professor said, but I would take a slight different position in one or two areas. Let me start with the economy. It's true that if you look at South Africa's economy, which was the largest economy in Africa, at the dawn of post-apartheid, South Africa has now slipped to number 3, behind Nigeria and Egypt. Now, there are reasons for that. Partly is what the professor said. One is because the old economy only served about 5 million people. The new economy is trying to serve now close to 60 million people. That model is more of distribution than production.
Yes.
The production equation has not been adequately addressed. And therefore, this is why the economy has even slipped down. If you look at how the economy large it was at one point almost $500 billion. I mean, $500 billion. Today is just under 300 billion. That is, it has taken a toll. And therefore, there is that hit in the economy, people being poorer. And one forgets the history of that economy. The second one is stewardship.
Yes.
But here again, let me link it to lack of synchronization of the electoral process of the party and of the presidency. We said this last week, that there is no way you can run 2 centers of power in a country. You know, fahali wawili hawaishi sisi moja. That is very clear. You now have a leader of ANC who's Cyril Ramaphosa. And Cyril Ramaphosa is poising himself to go into an election. Yet, the state presidency is under Zuma. Yes. Now, that is a problem because he still has, and this is where stewardship comes up. Unfortunately, during his stewardship as a president, this has not, it has been dogged with some scandals, the state capture and the rest. Yes. And therefore, people are saying, let him get out. And therefore, the ANC cannot march forward because if you look at the performance of the results, in 2009, ANC scored over 70% of the electorate, just under 70% or around 70%. In the last election, it was just over 50%. Now, that tells you that the ANC is declining in popularity. And therefore, the party must then address what are the fundamental fault lines within the party. And part of it then is seen as weaknesses. One of them, of course, is the unmet expectations. The people thought with the new dispensation, they would now have land, they would have jobs, but forgetting that the cake that was there was only serving a small proportion. The moment you spread it, it's not going to be adequate. And so that is a fundamental problem. But here is where now I see the situation forward. There are 2 ways that 3 paths to this crisis now. I think what President Zuma probably would like to look for is a more assured way that when he leaves office, he's not going to have a date with courts and live in courts and perhaps wherever else. And that is probably not coming because if ANC seems to give him that guarantee, then people will say, look, you are abetting and promoting what was seen as corruption. The second aspect, he probably sees that the party he has a mandate from the people who elected him. And the party structure cannot override that mandate. And therefore, technically, he can still stay put. But then the danger is ANC will split. He has support. And therefore, ANC must handle him very carefully. Because the moment you try to bundle him out of the office, ANC can break up. And with the weak support that still manifests from the previous election, the others will be ready to take on and the ANC could be seeing its worst scenario.
But
there are all these problems.
Yeah, but we've just heard from the Secretary General of ANC that is a foregone conclusion, and there is no backing down on this particular decision that he has to go, right? So it seems that is really cast in stone right now.
Going is going.
Yes.
The question, this is an end game. There's no question, it's an end game. The question then, how does this game end? It could end in his terms. It could end in the terms of course, red lines have been drawn. What now remains to be done is to see how it's prosecuted.
This is sort of a deja vu as well. It's not the first time we can see a recalling of a president. You mentioned Thabo Mbeki that was recalled,
yes,
but how then did ANC fare after the recalling also of Thabo
That's
Mbeki?
where I took a slight position from what you were saying that, well, it looks like it's not a very good situation. I think to me, it's democracy at play. Unfortunately, there is lack of synchronization of the party leadership and the state leadership. If this had been synchronized properly, we wouldn't be witnessing this. And actually, they have recognized it. They are even saying, in the new dispensation, they probably will have to synchronize these two positions.
Thank you. And we can see the party politics really shaping also the politics of the country, where everything is done within the context of the party ideology, the context of the party principles, the context of our party manifesto. And if you're not really towing the line, then it means you have to go. How can we extrapolate some lessons from this as Kenya right now? Because our parties, they're not really, we've heard from the president saying even, yeah, you know, we want to make this party a robust party, not a party that is just a political tool for you to gain a seat during electioneering time, right? But even after that, post, how do we know that we have a party, we have the rules, and we follow the rules of the particular party? So what lessons can we learn here that if you're not performing, a party, you know, is actually over and above you, and it's a final arbiter in determining whether you will be in that office or not. It's not about, you know, people, yes, voted for you, but it's also ultimately to the ticket of the party that they gave you to earn this particular seat. What lessons do we get from here?
Should I pass it to Dr. Kanenjo, or should I? Let me say something.
You want to pass it? Yeah. You want to collect your thoughts?
Yes,
then
yes.
Please. All right, let's have Dr. Kanenjo.
Yes. You know, in the wake of the ongoing crisis, especially crisis of leadership in Africa, the last couple of days I had to think a little bit about what leadership is. And, you know, leadership is an ability to create an inspiring vision and be able to motivate others to reach that vision. It is taking on tasks and challenges that affect society, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. It's being that thing in us that dares us to dream, not for ourselves, but for others, not for politics, but for posterity. And when I use that standard to measure, even just given the history of South Africa, what Zuma has been in the last couple of years, it's been a disgrace. He way falls short of that. Now, we know that Zuma came to power and hounded out Thabo Mbeki because of Zulu nationalism. The same nationalism that fought so fiercely against the ANC at the time it used to be the Inkatha Freedom Party under Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Now, what Ambassador is actually attesting to is there is a danger of the split in ANC, in part because there's still a lot of heightened tensions, especially given the emergency of Zulu nationalism, that also informed the rise of Malemas and the group.
Yes.
Yeah. And so part of the party might argue that this is a foregone conclusion. But the truth is, number one, Zuma is still entitled to be in office until I think next year, right? Number two, the realities of bringing back the past, especially within the ANC, might actually split the party and lead South Africa into a non-path. And so this is something that has to be looked at very carefully. Now, coming back to the point about political parties. Political parties on this continent, and especially in this country, have been, at best, ridiculous, in part because they're very seasonal. We don't create political parties as institutions that can actually have an ideology and advance it beyond 5-year term. Now, the president did allude yesterday, I think, emphasize the need of building his own coalition and making sure that party survives. It's very critical we actually build those parties. If you just look at the history of this country since 1992, you're going to see we've had probably 100 political parties up to date. We need to move away from that and move towards more ideologically based political parties, build institutions that are actually strong enough to be able to deliver something. A vision and a manifesto that can be implemented, not just one that will be using platitudes and for campaign purposes. It's very critical that we move towards that direction if we actually want to evolve as a democratic country in the years to come.
Right.
Right.
I think let's not, well, perhaps one point to mention here, and I want to agree to a large extent what Hassan has said. ANC is one of the oldest parties in Africa.
Yes.
Even in the world, by the way. But look at what has happened. You know, fighting against apartheid was an easier part because they had a common vision, they had a common enemy, and therefore it was easy to unify the party. We said here last week, we are now talking about 30 years after the party. What united them towards fighting against the apartheid is not what unites them today. Today now is bread and butter, jobs, employment, income creation and all that. And this is where the party will have now strengths and stresses, and especially seen against perhaps misadministration, which the party has been accused of, corruption and the rest. And therefore, there are those who are now running away to form new alliances. And that's where South Africa is at very, interesting crossroads. And therefore, the path that ANC charts forward will now make or unmake ANC.
Yeah, Debarl, let me make this adage like this. There are three major approaches to how we understand African politics. And Ambassador, the whole discussion, the way I followed it, comes to two things. There is an external aspect to South Africa. By extension, there was a lot of foreign direct investments from the West in South Africa. What you used to see in South Africa was an extension of other parts of the world there. So there is a neo-Marxist argument there. But at the same time, there's what we call the statist approach. People are saying, now you are Africans. You've had your country for 30 years. There is no longer any apartheid in sight. What have you done with your country? And these are the stark realities. It is easy to say something, but to do it becomes something else. And we must run away as fast as we can, because Montesquieu said it. No man, no individual, whoever it is, vested with power is not liable to abuse it. We must check them with institutions. And that is the way to go. And therefore, South Africa seems to have inherited a powerful legacy in terms of economic power, in terms of where it was coming from, a powerhouse around the continent and in the world in many standards. It's even rated as one of the BRICS, as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now South Africa. So because of the potential. But you can see a little bit of those bottlenecks. So managing the affairs of a state and building structures that go beyond individuals is one great lesson we must learn. And we must go beyond these parties that look like they are representing a tribe and a region. And because Professor Laparombara said, in fact, what we have in these places, or if you like to read Maurice Duverger and all this, we don't have parties. They have to be anchored on certain ideological and lasting things that go beyond people who speak a certain language and some of these things, or some village out there, into things that project into economy, jobs, and other things that point to our posterity as a nation. So we need to see more of this, so that, in fact, that would help to consolidate our democracy. But just look at a whole South Africa having such problems. So, they are within their own path of growth and transformation, but I think they are a little bit caught short, so they need to work hard.
Debarl, I believe this is the beginning of the end of ANC as we know it.
Even under the chairmanship of
Ramaphosa. But this is the beginning of the end, unless they are very careful. Chairman Mao, as we know, purged the entire China through cultural revolution. But in Chairman Mao's vision, and I was a visiting scholar to Pudong district University of Pudong, I find remnants of incredible, careful crafting of his vision for the future, where he put all the top economists to craft not only revolution, but what happened after the revolution. First, to clean up China out of Western influence, Japanese influence, everything. And then Chinese begin to think about themselves and creating craft that they originate from China. And it took years to turn communist, Stalin, Leninist theory into a really practical theory, which today we are all admiring as China is emerging as a major world power. Is this going to happen to ANC? I have a really serious fundamental doubt that he will transform into this kind of thing.
Okay, so I attended a conference for the last 2 days on governance. It was actually on governance summit, and it's all about, you know, ethical leadership. It's all about the report from Marvin King for governance codes. And of course, he's a South African. He's been, he's a Justice Marvin King from South Africa, retired justice, and he's been very instrumental in coming up with the corporate governance code as well. And one of the fundamental issues that he raises, of course, even as we're moving, companies don't really need to be looking down on the profit and losses and maximizing on the profit for the shareholders, but even the whole aspect of sustainability in the society. Ethical leadership is very key, not only just in government, but also in the corporate sector as well. Correct. But what lessons can we learn from here? This is what I want us to draw from what is happening in South Africa when it comes to ethical leadership. That if you've been indicted as a person, as a leader in corruption, then you have to step down, right? And what mechanisms do we have in this country as well? Because we've known so many leaders who've been embroiled in corruption, then they go scot-free. So many cases that we have, really, the reports have been done there, task committees have been put forth, they come up with reports, but none of that actually is affected at all. So as a country, where do we draw lessons? And how can we as a country also try and up the ante in terms of making sure that our political parties are instruments of accountability, not instruments of winning elections? Yes, you will win election through that particular party, but if you do not really, hold good or make good of your promise, then we recall you. I mean, that's the way we should go, right?
Debarl, let me say this.
Before we come to you, let's hear from Ambassador Erastus. Okay. How do we overhaul a political system in this country that is not just a politics of finger-pointing, accusatory fingers being raised every you, he, oh, she said, but it's a politics of issues, politics of substance, politics of progression, not retrogression.
Well, I can say without any doubt or hesitation that in Africa, perhaps the biggest challenge now we have is what you might call leadership deficit. And that deficit comes from a whole host of factors, some of which were mentioned here, that the state formation has never been very clearly articulated and understood by the practitioners who craft together the state. Because whereas in Africa now we have quasi-states, actually they are a collection of nation-states. And therefore the state has never been properly constituted in most of African countries. And this is what I think he mentioned early on, when he talked about the structures of the state and having institutions. We have a preference of strong men versus institutions. And that's one of the dangers. And this is what has brought us to where we are today, because if you look at our history, it was those parties that fought independence, perhaps these people who fought for independence were not properly equipped to get into leadership. And some of them were handed over this. So we were off to a false start. And of course, the external forces which dominated us for years, it is ironical and I think unfair for us 60 years down the road for us to continue to blame our colonial masters. But that's history. That we inherited this fractured state, which was never properly formed, and therefore we are struggling to make it together. But unfortunately, each time we seem to make a good start, we fall back again. And so we need to start to see that change, like, you know, cultural change, value change, you know, so that we can now come down the table and say, how do we transcend these nation states which amalgamate to make a state, that we can now start to have a nation state that is functioning under institutional framework and a value system that is coherent with itself.
Oh, fantastic. And maybe we can hear from Dr. Khanenja as well. Even with the resignation of Attorney General Githu Muigai, that you don't have to go the whole gamut of your tenure. If you feel you're frustrated, so to speak, I'm not saying he said he is frustrated, but if you feel that you're not really performing according to the functions that is expected of you or that particular office, then you don't have to hang on until your tenure, you know, really comes full circle. You can actually resign if you don't think you're really performing. But in a country where people are saying, I'll rather die than resign, what lessons can we learn from Githu Muigai? I think we can look on the flip side as well, that yes, we need such leaders who think, okay, I don't have the mettle to actually go, or the grit to actually go full steam ahead and finish the tenure, so I tender my resignation because of such and such circumstances that I do have, or I feel maybe someone else will do a better job than I can. Or even declining some of his positions that people are awarded or appointed to.
Yeah, Debarl, we have a tendency in this part of the world to act as if we are children of a lesser God, somehow condemned to perpetual misery. And anytime we see something different, something that's supposed to be proper in other parts of the world, it raises alarm. Now, I want to hope that Professor Githu resigned because either perhaps he thought he should leave the post for someone else, or perhaps he thought he might not be able to deliver within the circumstances, or just resigned honorably for his own reasons. Because if that is the case, I allowed him for doing that. That's what we should be doing. Yes. But the fact that we find it surprising that someone actually may just resign because they think it's about time they should go, it speaks not more about them, but actually more about us and how we look at ourselves. And I think as a country and a society, you know, we should be more confident in our abilities. We should be more confident in ourselves and look forward to actually more resignations. You know, in lots of other countries, there is a train that derails somewhere and then the transport minister resigns because they think the buck stops with them and ultimately is their responsibility. But this idea of chest thumping, you know, I'd rather die than resign, it's actually not helpful. And it's shaping young minds in a wrong way because once they assume those offices, they're going to be acting the same way.
All right.
Debarl.
Yes. Very briefly.
Debarl, America is great. Because American people feel part and parcel of the stake of the American being. They call it the America exceptionalist. They're very proud. When their national anthem is playing, people cry. You know, there's a really emotional attachment to the state. And I will disagree with the ambassador that we were off. Or there was a fault on our start, because otherwise we should have left the colonialists for perpetual, you know, control of the Africa. And almost 60 years, we're still talking about colonialism. You know, we're taking the system that we need to build, craft and build ourselves. You cannot talk about a system without people. You must build the people. You must create the middle class. You must create a stake where every person feels that I'm part of this system. Otherwise, it cannot work. The history has demonstrated that over and over again. And if you watch China, China is transforming the people of China through very careful crafting economics and vision, which bring and make sure that everyone has a house, everyone has transportation, and everyone has a stake in the system. We cannot, and Secondly, there is tendency for us in Africa to be very happy. You know, Idi Amin destroy Uganda, and then we still accept him as president in Addis Ababa. This fellow in Congo is destroying the country. We still accept him. Their situation in South Africa is with enough is enough.
Enough is enough. And of course, what do we do also with these leaders? Because I can also show you, if my director Mark may just pick up this.
So these institutions, so we must build institutions. We must have genuine leadership, people who believe in what they tell people. They don't come and say, I'll build you a road, and then once they're elected, they run away. Yes. So they need that kind of thing. And then, very importantly, a supporting political culture, supporting political culture. Let me tell you, Debarl, the way you see people getting scot-free with corruption is because there are people who like it, and there are people who benefit from it, and there are many.
And they want to keep the system.
Yes, and they want to keep the status quo. They love it. And even the communities, some of them say, you are accusing our son of corruption, you see. So we really have to build that political culture in order to move our institutions and to make our parties to be drivers of governance. How many of them hold good, clean elections, party nominations in the first place? So we really have got to look at all these, and it can't be done in a day, but we have to do it incrementally.
Thank you. Let's hear from...
Just a quick comment.
Ambassador, 30 seconds as you're winding up, also your closing remarks.
I hope the Professor doesn't understand me as saying that we would have had perpetual colonialism. I mean, that would be a disaster.
No.
What we mean here by saying off to a false start, look at even our constitution. Where was it drawn? We brought it from Lancaster House. How many people went there? What was their background? How did we consent to them going to draw that constitution? How long did we use that constitution before we come with us? You see, this is the very false start, because if you look at the structures that were under colonialism, it's literally what we took on and moved on. And so, until we come to a situation like what we were saying, say Mao, where you had a cultural revolution, we are still going to live in this mode of borrowed ideas, and which we crafted, which perhaps we have not even internalized and accepted.
Right, thank you. Let's hear from 30 seconds, Prof.
30 seconds. We need to build a next prison, next to a committee called economic crime, and lock all these people out.
So even if you have a prison and we have an act that is not being implemented, what is the rhyme and reason for having it? Right? We can have all that, or even come with legislation, but still, right? If they are not effected, it will be null and void. Let's hear from Dr. Momonzao, briefly, 30 seconds.
To build a country for the good of all citizens, we have to believe in the common gain we get from being part of the state and being one nation. And therefore, we must nurture a positive political culture that upholds institutions.
Thank you. Dr. Khanenja.
The trouble sometimes we have in our country is that when you steal chicken, you end up in committee. When you steal $1 billion, get elected to office. Now, what I would like to remind all the leaders out there is that it is not the example, it's not the example of your power that brings positive change. It's the power of your example that transforms societies.
Thank you.